another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time. This is Liberty Dad versus Mamdani's policies. So today, we're doing affordability. And then, like I said, come Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, what I'll probably do is I'll probably jump ahead. I wanted to do these all in order, but what I'll probably do is maybe do paying for our agenda, climate, and LGBTQIA plus protections those 3 days. We'll see. I may figure something else out and do the early childhood and education. I don't know. We'll see how this works out. When I take a further in-depth look at them and try to gauge, how much time is this, are these particular topics going to take? So, but for now, let's start with affordability. So I'm going to read it here for you. And then after I read it, I'm going to play his own video and then we're going to discuss it. And I'm going to tell you where I think there are some problems. So food prices are out of control. Nearly 9 in 10 New Yorkers say the cost of groceries is rising faster than their income. Only the very wealthiest aren't feeling squeezed at the register. As mayor, Zohran will create a network of city-owned grocery stores focused on keeping prices low, not making a profit. Without having to pay rent or property taxes, they will reduce overhead and pass on savings to shoppers. They will buy and sell at wholesale prices, centralize warehousing and distribution, and partner with local neighborhoods on products and sourcing. With New York City already spending millions of dollars to subsidize private grocery store operators, which are not even required to take SNAP or WIC, we should redirect money, public money, to a real public option. So that's his idea. And then he's got a video here. So let's play that video. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the video. And I've got like several spots where I want to stop it. And I kind of want to chime in. So that's what we're going to do. So let's go on over here to our videos and see what he has to say.
Grocery prices are out of control. The cost of eggs and milk has skyrocketed. Some stores are even using dynamic pricing, jacking up the cost over the course of a day, depending on what they can get away with. It doesn't.
Okay, let's stop right here. So he says, depending on what they can get away with. And he's talking about like this dynamic pricing. Okay. It's a bit dishonest because dynamic pricing includes raising the price and lowering the price. And there are reasons why a price may be lowered. They may say, oh no, this is at the end of its shelf life. We can no longer sell this. So why might you think a store would lower the price of a product that say, is it going to expire in, let's say 2 days or maybe 1 day? Let's just say 1 day. Let's say it's Wednesday evening. They're taking a look at all their stuff and they see that there's some things that are going to be expired as of Friday. So they have Thursday to sell it. Why might they lower the price? Well, if you said to incentivize people to buy it so that they get some money as opposed to no money for that product, then please step ahead to the front of the class because you are correct. That is exactly what would happen. And if you look into it, you will find that dynamic pricing includes up and down, higher prices and lower prices. And there's reasons that they might, one reason for the higher prices is maybe there's a shortage on one product and everybody decides, hey, you know what? We'll just buy this other product in its place, right? So you have the normal people that were buying. So you have product A and product B. Product A is out. There are already people that are buying product B, but then people that were normally going to buy product A, well, since product A is out, they might say, well, let's go buy product B. And so they may raise their prices. Now he says whatever they can get away with. But the problem is prices rise and they lower. The rise in the goods and where the prices rise and lower, they do so with a consistent association that economists say they rise. In other words, let me rephrase it a little bit differently. The reason that the prices may go up or down are for the same reasons that economists always tell you that the prices will go up and down. In other words, when you look into it, The argument is we raised the price, we lowered the price for this reason. And there are very consistent reasons. So some of them are increased cost. So if my cost increase, who pays for that? If you said the end buyer, the consumer, again, go or stay at the head of the class. That is absolutely correct. That's how it works. The supplier, they say, if you're talking about a loaf of bread, and we'll just talk about maybe the wheat. So the wheat, the farmer who grows the wheat, let's say he has some bad crops. Okay, well, he's already invested all of his money, and so maybe now the crops, maybe something happens to them. There's a big fire, or I don't know, whatever, right? And so he loses a lot of crops. Well, he's already put his money in. He's already put his money and his time in. Maybe he's purchased new equipment. He spent all that time. Maybe he had labor that he had to pay, cost to pay for. So all those costs are gone, reliant on the idea that he's going to get paid when the wheat is ready to harvest. And so he may raise the cost of what he has left for, let's just say, the manufacturer who's going to take the wheat and they're going to convert it into flour. All right. And then maybe another part of the plant converts that flour into bread. Okay. Well, now they have to pay a little bit higher price. So what are they going to do? They're going to say, okay, well, the grocery store that's buying this bread, we need them to pay a higher cost for this bread because we got to recoup our cost. And it was unexpected that these prices were going to rise. They did so out of nowhere, and we're not going to foot that bill. So they're going to cause somebody else to pay for it. Right. And then and I'm just kind of simplifying this. So then the grocery store might say, okay, well, now it's going to cost us more money to buy this bread. So we're going to raise our prices so that the end consumer is the one that's paying for it. So at the end of the day, the end consumer pays for that long chain of price increase. Now, it's not to say that nobody else in there pays any amount. They may pay some, right? They're likely to, but that's an increased cost. So that's one of the reasons why a price may rise. Another one is supply and demand. Okay. Now, this would be like, let's say, well, in the same example that I just gave you, the demand on product B went up, right? And so in that particular case, when I said, hey, you got product A, you got product B, product A is out, people go buy B. Well, in that particular, that's supply and demand, right? There's an issue with the supply. You could also have increased cost on product A. So you have simultaneously, you have an increased cost for product A because there's less in the chain to work with, right? And then people got to meet their cost. They've got to pay for their cost. But then also, since people can't get product A, they may go to product B, which is in more of a supply. But then that supply dwindles down a little bit because it leveled out, it equalized to match the demand for the most part. And you know this because when you go to the store and you see all the bread that you want and you only need one, that means the supply is more than meeting the demand. But when you go there and you see that, hey, there's empty shelves, then clearly the supply was insufficient to handle the demand. Okay. Give me a second here. I got to clear my throat. Okay. Sorry about that. Another reason is, as we always hear, to improve profit margins. There's various reasons why the profit margin may need to, they may need to increase it, right? Maybe they're looking to do some investments in the future and they need to increase these profit margins. People always look at profit and they think of it as like this nasty thing, like, oh, you're just making too much. And here's the way to think about this. The profit that a company tries to get is really not much different than the average person who says, I would like to have a raise, right? Everybody wants to get more with less, right? Like nobody in this planet is going to say no if their employer says, we've hit, the jackpot. We're giving all of our employees a raise. You don't have to do anything more. We're just giving you a raise because, man, we're hot right now. Let's just say they did that. Okay, great. No one's going to complain about that. No one's going to be like, I really should do more work for this. They're not, right? You're going to always try to find a way to do the least amount and get the same pay. And then your employer in the flip side, they will be like, well, we want to get the most work out of this person and pay them the least, right? That we can. Now, when I say the least that we can, I don't mean the least possible, because there are companies out there that are like, look, this pay is too low. We're not doing that. But they do have a ceiling for the pay as well. And so they have a range in mind that they say this is worth it to us. So I don't think he's being very honest right up front, because he's presenting this as if the only reason that somebody might utilize dynamic pricing is so that they can get away with it, right? Like it's this very nefarious thing. Like, man, the only reason you would raise your prices is because you're a bad person. But that's simply not true. And in most, now there are cases where it happens. It is true. Sometimes somebody tries to raise their price, right? And we're not going to get into the details tonight, but that's where the free market comes into play. The free market means you have to compete with those who are trying to take your business. And so if you unfairly raise your prices just because you can, well, it's a lot harder if there's competition that can say, what a fool, because we're going to take advantage and lower our price just enough to get his customers to come over to us. Right. And so then that forces him to say, okay, let me lower my prices back down because I don't want to lose my customers. So I think it's worth considering that the whole story isn't being told already, and we're 10 seconds into the video. Let's continue.
Need to be this way. I'm Zohran Mamdani, and as mayor, I will create a network of city-owned grocery stores. It's like a public option for produce. We will redirect city funds from corporate supermarkets to city-owned grocery stores, whose mission is lower prices, not price gouging. These stores.
Okay. So I don't want to dive into price gouging too much. Okay. That's not really what this episode is about. And I've talked about price gouging in the past. You can go look up what I have to say about them in episode 353, episode 386. I talked about price gouging there. And I think I did one way, way, way back in back in the first handful of podcasts that I ever did that were audio only. Okay. But it is uncomfortable for people to hear, but price gouging is a good thing because it helps balance supply and demand, just like what I was telling you about. Okay. Where you have product A that, a fire happened and it killed the supply of wheat, which had an effect eventually on the bread that hit the grocery stores. Right. And so, they might price gouge, and there's various reasons for it. Right. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is balance supply and demand. The fact is, supply is always finite, but demand isn't necessarily, like, it doesn't match equally. It's not the case that whatever the demand is just so happens to be exactly what the supply is, or within some really close range. There could be situations where the demand is very, very low, yet there's a lot of supply. That's when you start seeing it on the shelves, the clearance shelves. That's because they're trying to get rid of it, but they still want some money for it. Even, like, think of it this way. Some money is better than $0, even if some money is only a fraction of the profit that they would have made, or if it's only if there's no profit and it doesn't even cover the cost. So let's say that there's a product that they're selling for $5, they buy it for $4, and it's not selling, right? So it cost them $4 to buy it. They want you to pay $5 for that. So they're going to make $1 in profit just on the sale, excluding labor and all these other costs. But just in the terms of what did it cost to get them and what did they sell it for, they're making a profit of $1. But let's assume for a moment that people they don't want to buy for $5. So then they have a full shelf of this stuff, and they got to get rid of it sometime. So what they might do is they might drop it down to $4, right? At cost. Okay, great. Now, do people buy it? Well, they don't have to. They're not obligated. So they could say, nope, yeah, $4 is still too much for that. We don't really care we don't really care about that. And so then the store might say, okay, well, let's sell it for $3.50. And you might say, well, DL, $3.50 is absurd. They're losing money. Yes, but consider if they paid $4 for it and they can get $3.50 versus $0, That's the difference of losing 50 cents versus losing the whole $4. And that may be just for one product, one item. I mean, one, of that product. And let's say they have 100 of those products and they don't sell any of them. Well, in my scenario here, that's $400 that they're out. They got $0 for. Okay. But if they sell it for 50 cents, I'm sorry, for not 50 cents, if they sell it for 350, you know, that's 50 cents underneath their cost. And then everybody decides to slowly buy them and they get them sold. Then for 100 items, that's going to be, instead of $400 loss, it's going to be $50 loss. I think I did the math right. Never do math live, but I sometimes break those rules. So it's just a matter of how much do you want to lose. If you're going to lose money, better to not lose that much because it's easier to recover from. And you can make this, you can bring this home to yourself. You can say, if I had to lose money, would I rather lose $5 or $50? Everybody will tell you I'd rather lose $5. So that's what's going on here. Okay. And that's how the supply and the demand work. But let's continue talking a little bit more about price gouging. Because like I said, the supply is always finite, but the demand is not. The two biggest the biggest value to price gouging is that it drives incentive to get more goods to a given location. So what I was just talking about a moment ago was a scenario where, okay, we have an overabundance, and why might they lower the price and keep lowering the price? Well, it's so that they lose the least amount of money possible. But what happens if you have people come in and they buy up all the stuff? Well, we have that happen here in Florida all the time. So imagine a community has 100 bottles of water, and all at the same store during an emergency. There's one store in a small town. There's 100 bottles of water, and there's however many citizens. Somebody is not getting water for one reason or another, right? No matter how you slice it up, unless there are fewer than 100 bottles and each bottle is going to one person. I'm sorry, does it? If there's 100 bottles of water and if there are fewer people than there are bottles of water, I think I said it right this time, right? Then if that's the case, then yes, everybody can get one bottle of water. But if you have 200 people and 100 bottles of water, you only have enough water to give to 100 people, literally half. Okay. So you have to find some way to ration it out. Now, from a libertarian perspective, we look and we say cost price is the best way. And that's because it does something that every other scheme that people try does not do. So what I told you, I said, somebody isn't getting water for one reason or another. What does that mean? That means we got to get water here quick. So raising the price, number one, it forces people to economize their demand. And that's really a matter of what do they really need. So I might be, if the price of a bottle of water, I'm gonna do more math. Got my notes here, so hopefully I'll get it right. But if the price of a bottle of water was $2 before the emergency, and then after the emergency, they price gouge and they put it up to $5. Okay, so now it's increased by $3. Okay, so that is the difference between, for somebody that has the money, because you might say, well, somebody that has the money might want to buy them. Yes, but they have to make a decision. They now have to say, well, I was able to get 5 bottles for $10. But now if I want that same 5 bottles, it's $25, right? Because it was once $2 and now it's $5. Okay. So now for me, it's a difference in $10, spending $10 or spending $25. Now, it's an easier decision to buy 5 bottles if you can get them for 10 than it is if you can get the 5 bottles for 25. And so I might decide, hey, I have the money. I got family members at home. I need those 5 bottles. I'm paying the $25 for them. You might also make the decision and say, well, I was actually only going to buy 3. The other 2 were just going to be for just in case. And so then you might say, and even though I really wanted 3, I could probably afford I could probably work off of 2. So I'll just buy 2, right? You're gonna start thinking in your head, what do you really need at a certain point? Okay. So and you're that's what's going on. People have to make decisions. There's incentives based on the situation. So what that does at the end of the day, and this is the feature that price gouging has that other schemes don't have, is now people from the outside are looking and they're like, he's willing to pay $5 for a bottle of water? Shoot. I'm over here where there's no emergency and the bottles were cheaper anyway. They were $1 a bottle. So I'm going to go buy 50 bottles and I'm going to go down and sell them for $5. That's going to be $250. We'll just make up some numbers here. My cost for buying those, what did I say? What did I say? 50 bottles? Yeah, 50 bottles. Yes, 50 bottles. So my cost was $50 to buy them. And then let's say his gas was $50 to get there. So he spent $100, right? But then he makes $250 in revenue. And so his profit is $150. He was incentivized to get into action, which means dropping everything that he's doing and do that, which means whatever he's doing, like the additional money that he's going to make is worth the cost of his time leaving and doing something other than what he was planning to do. Maybe work, maybe be on vacation, maybe just watch everything on the news, whatever the case is, right? So it incentivizes people to get more water back over where it's needed because they want to get in on this $5 a bottle. But as soon as they start getting there, and then all of a sudden, let's say you have 200 people in a town, there was once 100 bottles, and one person could have one, leaving 100 people without bottles of water. And then let's say 200 bottles of water all of a sudden show up. Well, guess what? Now there's 200 bottles of water, 200 people, of which half of them already have a bottle. So now there's negotiating room for everybody involved, right? Because now the people that have got water can say, well, we only need one more bottle and we're not really willing to pay $5 for it because we can probably survive on the one bottle that we got. The people that have no bottles, they could say, well, I want to get some, and they might still be willing to pay $5, but the person that brought them all has to now say, okay, I don't want to leave here with most of the bottles of water because I won't be able to sell them and recoup that cost, the cost of my time and the cost it took me to get here, the gas and whatnot. Right. So he has to make some decisions and say, well, again, back to my product A, product B, where I was talking about like, maybe you lower a price in order to get some money versus zero, right? Because you're losing more. That's really the big benefit that you get from price gouging. So when he presents it like this is a bad thing, it's not. And we have to understand that. And it is counterintuitive. You have to really think this through. You have to go back to the other episodes that I did on price gouging, because if you can understand price gouging, you can like that alone. If you understand why price gouging is not necessarily bad, okay? If you can understand that, then you can understand any libertarian argument as to why this is a bad idea. Hopefully, I mean, the whole city run grocery stores. Hopefully, what I will do is break it all down for you, but that can only take you so far. So I encourage you to go back and really consider the price gouging and how it actually can be a very valuable asset in the market. Okay. We don't like discussing it, but the reality is prices alter our decisions. That's why BOGOs are so attractive. Like, who doesn't want one for the price or two for the price of one? Well, price gouging, that's kind of the reverse. It's kind of like one for the price of two, right? It's the opposite way, And so what I mean by that is, we change our behavior based on prices. When the price gets really, really cheap, what do? We go buy a bunch of it. When the price is really, really, low, when the price is really, really high, then we buy less of it, right? That's our behavior changes based on the prices. So we need a mechanism that will fairly work this out in the long term, not in one moment. You capture a moment, you're not really getting the impact because the impact extends beyond that one moment. So anyway, he's discussing like this whole profit motive and how this is bad. And again, I would disagree. I don't see an issue with the profit motive because it motivates people to do things that would benefit somebody else. Just like in the story I told, where I made up, like you've got 200 people in a town and two different groups of people say, hey, I'm going to drop everything I'm doing. I'm going to go buy a whole bunch of water and I'm going to drive it down. Okay. That's the profit motive, right? That it's motivating people to do something that other people want. And then when you have a market that's free and has competition, then what that does is that forces them to compete for the business. So, but I just wanted to kind of point this out because he mentions price gouging. I don't really want to get in. Hopefully that'll be enough. Again, you can go check out the past shows. So let's continue listening.
Will operate without a profit motive or having to pay property taxes or rent, and will pass on those savings to you. They'll partner.
Okay, so you're gonna pass on the savings. He's again talking about the profit motive. I want you to ever ask yourself, what is the profit motive? It's the same as when you ask for a raise so you can save money for a rainy day to buy new cool stuff or invest it in your future. You are seeking it's not really considered profit in a sense, but I want you to consider you go to school, right? You get some college debt. That's a cost to you. So now you get out on the marketplace and you're negotiating, and let's say you get a job for $50,000. Okay. And you've negotiated that. Now you probably wanted one for 100,000, but maybe you got 50,000. And what you're going to be constantly trying to do is you're going to constantly try to work and get more and more and more of a raise. Why? Well, one, you want to pay off the college that you went to. I mean, and it's not just the money that you've invested; it's your time as well. Because you'll look at it and you'll say, "Hey, not only am I paying these college loans of like say $50,000 or whatever, I spent 4 years doing this. 4 years I could have done something else." So there's two elements that you're most likely trying to pay for. That's the profit motive. But then perhaps you might like a nice car. You've got a beater. It doesn't have any AC or heat, right? That's busted. And so you're like, I'd like to have a new car. I mean, the car I've got works. It gets me there, but I would like to have, more temperature controlled as I'm driving to and from work every day. Right? So that's your new cool stuff that you might want to buy. Just makes your life a little bit better. It doesn't necessarily, your employer doesn't necessarily get anything out of it. At best, you come to work a little bit happier. Okay. But then you might also want to invest it for your future because you never know one day maybe you'll need to retire. You won't have any work. So you'll need some money to live on. You might want to invest it so that it grows, but also is money for new business development. New developments for you, not business, but new things that will contribute to the business. Maybe you want to take further education and so on and so forth, right? And so you save up some money. You're basically investing in yourself. Ultimately, I think that's what the profit motive is. Well, an entity that is selling also has a profit motive, and you could make an equivalent. You can make an argument that the things that they have a profit motive for are no different than an individual who wants to get a raise. Hopefully that makes sense. So the profit motive, again, is not a bad thing. It allows grocery stores to improve the store. It allows them to hire additional workers, perhaps, right? It allows them to maybe acquire new technology and whatever other things, right? Maybe they build a whole brand new store so that your favorite store is doing so well in your town. They had two, they built a third one, which conveniently, I want to point out to Mr. Zohran here, they're arguing that like part of their argument is like, hey, we've got a lot of problems getting grocery stores into certain areas. And so there's food deserts. Okay. So perhaps the profit motive wasn't bringing the profit. So the stores, they weren't able to generate additional money to maybe improve the store or to hire additional people there or for whatever reason. Perhaps so much about that store, either in real life as an actual store that had to shut down or one that never got built, was based on there's not going to be any profit. So therefore, we would be continually losing money. Because look, it's a super fine line between making money and losing money, right? It's literally 2 cents. Well, I guess, yeah, 2 cents. So if you have 1 penny in profit, and then let's say you take that, somebody takes that away, you don't have that profit. Okay, now you're broke even, but you're still not in the loss. You're not at a loss yet. You're broke even. But then you take 1 penny, and then now you've lost money. So the line, literally between between making money and losing money is 2 cents. Just want to point that out, right? You have to consider this. I think I got my dog barking, so hopefully, she's not much I can do about it. She's somebody's coming in. So anyway, we'll try to get past that. Maybe I'll take a break. I don't know. She seems like she's calming down, or maybe not. We'll continue on. She'll be fine. All right. So then he talks about, property taxes and rent. Now, these two are kind of funny because if you don't have to pay property taxes on your home and you didn't have to pay rent or a mortgage, could you do more with the money that you make? If you said yes, I'm going to give that one to you. It's a super easy one, but yes, stay at the head of the class or go there. Okay. Well, the same thing is with a store that's private. So, like any business, they could do more. They could offer better services if they didn't have to pay property taxes or pay rent, which would basically be a mortgage. And many businesses rent. So you'll have like a developer, they will create a big, property, with a bunch of different buildings, and maybe they'll build them to spec or whatever. Maybe they'll sell them so that they are owned. But a lot of companies, they prefer to rent so that if they have to close down, they don't have to deal with the empty building. Okay. So, so that's how that works. So yeah, if they didn't have to pay property taxes, if they didn't have to pay a mortgage or rent, well, yeah, they could do better as well, right? They could offer better services, better food, open more, whatever. So he's not really telling us anything enlightening other than, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to create a store, and he's going to blame it on the profit motive, but then turn around and the first two things he points out are literally, oh yeah, we're not going to make them pay cost that everybody has to pay. Everybody has to pay property tax. Everybody has to pay rent of some kind or some equivalent. The only case that's different is if you've paid off, if you have a piece of property and you've paid off all the loans on it. And in that case, you're only left with property taxes, but you can't get out of that one. Okay. And if you're definitely not getting out of it if you're running a business on it. So it's just funny that he tells you profit motive's bad, but then immediately tells you about things that everybody has to consider when there's a cost, including most of the people viewing this. Then he goes on, he says, like, by eliminating the profit motives, in taxes and rent, the city will, they will do all these things. Here's what I think will happen. I think the city will basically see two outcomes. Number one, privately owned grocery stores will become more expensive, right? What's going to happen is he builds these 5 grocery stores. People are going to go to them. Let's say they figure out a way to offer lower prices. That doesn't mean they've lowered their cost. That just means they're choosing not to pay the cost in many cases. Okay. So let's say that he does that, and then there's grocery stores that now have fewer customers. So in order to make sure that they can, they have to deal with the profit motive still. So they may raise their prices, which means now it's going to be, okay, the wealthy people, the people who have the money that could go to the nicer store will probably go there because they're probably not going to like what's being offered by an entity that is not even trying to make a profit for which then you have to ask, how will you continually adapt and improve what you're doing if you're not making any additional money for that purpose? Right? So if you think this through, what you're really going to be looking at is a further divide between the rich and the poor. That's the second outcome, right? So the first one is just going to be that, yeah, they might do it. They may have lower prices. We have to be careful and say lower prices, not lower cost, lower prices. And this other store will have to likely raise their price to compensate for now the fewer people that are going to be coming to their store, which means the people that are coming to their store that are willing to pay those prices are now going to, one, be expecting a particular type of service because they're paying more for it, right? And that grocery store will likely provide it. So ultimately, you get two types of stores for the wealthier and the cheap and the poor, and that's going to help push out any of the middleman. So if you think of like, I don't know, Aldi as, one of the cheaper ones, and then you say like a Publix is the more expensive one, and then somewhere in the middle is a Winn-Dixie. Okay, they're somewhere in the middle. So you have three ranges of grocery stores that you can go to, and they're each going to have their pros and their cons. Well, under what he's doing, what I would expect is that middle one, the Winn-Dixie's, gonna lose out because you're gonna get a lot of people that are gonna want to go get the cheaper price, but then you're gonna have a lot of people that are gonna be like, look, where I shop, the store, blah, 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 all these, the type of the quality of the service, et cetera, all that stuff. I'm willing to pay this higher premium for it. And so then you're basically going to have a split. And then this middle group, there's not going to be enough of them to support stores. So I think you're going to find basically almost like segregated stores between the rich and the poor. That's how I see the outcome. All right. But the biggest problem in government-owned grocery store is that it obscures the cost from those who need to see it the most. New Yorkers. Why would you need to see it? Well, I told you a moment ago that what happens with a price is you act on it accordingly. And the supply and the demand, the market, the supply chain, they respond to those fluctuations. Everybody responds to those fluctuations, every entity. And then at some point, they become maybe not equal, but they level out where it's like, all right, we're hanging out around here. The people that are manufacturing it are somewhere around here. The people that are buying it at the end of the chain they're around here. And then everybody else in the middle is also doing their balancing act. And they're all acting within some range. So the biggest problem is one group of that is now going to be removed from needing to even worry about it, right? Because you're just going to go here and you're going to get the lower price because you can't go to this other one and pay the larger price. And then if I'm correct, which I am, then that middle store, there's no there's not much of a need for them to exist because there's too few people that are to go there. So at the end of the day, you lose out because you cannot contribute now to that fluctuation that's in the market. You can't do it like you were able to. So I think price is a very valuable asset. We tend not to think so, but it really is. Another issue you got, when you're unburdening city-owned grocery stores from property tax and rent, that doesn't make the cost go away. Okay, property tax pays for certain things. If you say, all right, these groups don't have to pay property tax, then you've got one of two options. There's just a little bit less in that pool, or you raise the property taxes on everybody else. Okay. But that cost is still there because that cost is associated, especially in government, with some sort of a need. We need that revenue, that tax money to come in because we're trying to pay for all these things. And of course, if you look through his platform, you'll find out that he has a long list of things that he wants to pay for. So this matters. You need to be able to not only see everything as transparently as possible in the market, but also understand that there is a cost that has to be addressed. You don't just get to say, nope, no cost. And then when you're where some of that revenue was coming in, then you've basically made the cost go up, right? Like, cause you have to cut out something, bring more in from somewhere else. You've disrupted it to where it needs to be addressed. So, what else? Yeah, basically, you can't escape the cost just by refusing to pay it. And when these stores run into financial trouble, and they will, which you see every other program that a city fails to do well, they will require more tax money or changes in how they're being run. And the changes are not going to be the same when there's a profit motive. When there's no profit motive, it's easier to make the change and say, too bad. When when there is a profit motive, it's easier to make a change, get yelled at, and then go, okay, you know what? I better pull back on that one. That one's not going to work. They're not having it. Customers aren't taking well to this. So, ultimately everything comes down to a relationship where people are interacting and engaging with as much information as possible. And when that happens, everybody starts adjusting their behavior accordingly and it levels out. When you get government involved and you say, "Hey, we're just going to pay, we're going to do all this stuff," then you start running into either ignoring cost or just refusing to pay them, which are going to be made up somewhere. All right, let's continue on. We got a couple more here. A few more
with
seconds.
small businesses and nearby farms and sell at wholesale prices. The job of city government isn't to tinker around the edges while 1 in 4 children across our city go hungry.
Okay, so I'm not going to dispute how many people are going hungry, because at the end of the day, whether it's 1 in 2, 1 in 12, people are going hungry. And, I'm not going to trivialize and make it sound like, oh, we need to do a government program if there's more, because then you get into the really complex of how many more is necessary to get involved, all that good stuff. Also, it just seems kind of rude to take it that route. Anyway, what he leaves out here in all of this, and what kind of bothers me, is he doesn't in any way explain how city-owned grocery stores will either be unaffected by the market forces that private grocery stores are subject to, um, or how they will manage around them. Okay, because he leaves out why prices have gone up. Right, because he starts out and he's kind of talking about price gouging, and so basically everybody looks at it and they go, "Okay, prices have went up. They must be gouging. Government must need to do something." That's kind of what happens here in the way that's presented. Whether that was intentional or not, I can't really say. Okay, but what he leaves out, in all of this, is why prices have gone up. They've gone up because of inflation and monetary policy, right? When we print money, value of the dollar goes down, prices got to change, and adjust to that. You have supply chain disruptions from a lot of world events, and this is not to, I'm not necessarily blaming anybody. These are just forces that are at play that have caused prices everywhere in general to go up. When you look at things, you can look at this list, and it's generally going to be 2 or 3 of them, right? Because these are consistent issues that cause prices to go up. You've got energy costs; those go up, then your prices go up. Regulatory and policy pressure. So think of that as like tariffs and other things like that. Well, those start introducing changes. People have to respond to those, right? So these are forces that will lead, and sometimes they lead people to lower their prices. You don't see it nearly as much, but sometimes a price does come down. I think it usually doesn't go down to where it was, but it sometimes comes down. But that's ultimately, when you're looking at what causes prices to go up, these kind of things. Demand shifts are another one. We talked about supply and demand a moment ago. Sometimes things get popular, sometimes they lose their popularity. So think of it this way. I've done the paleo and the keto diet, and their popularity has made 2 things happen. Number 1, supply increased. A lot of people started seeing that there was a demand for it. They were like trying to get in on it. But then initially the prices for a lot of that stuff were relatively high because there were only a couple of brands that you could go to get it. And so there was a limited amount of options for you available. Well, then what happened was once everybody started getting into it, and people started figuring out what are the best ways and recipes and stuff like that. Because a lot of it, when you started out, some of the food that you got from the store that was like paleo friendly or keto friendly, not really that tasty. You're like, ugh, this is not so good. But then eventually people got good at it. And they started figuring out what are good recipes that people like, that fit this particular dietary pattern. And then more people started doing it. And then what do we see? We see the prices go down. Okay. So again, to repeat all of that really quickly, inflation and monetary supply chain disruption, energy cost, labor cost, regulatory and policy pressures, and demand shifts. These are all things that consistently cause prices to go up. So if if Mr. Mamdani, I think he's an assembly member. Yeah, assembly member Mamdani, if he wants to talk about we're going to do a grocery store, we're going to make lower prices, you need to make sure to ask him, how are you going to insulate or how are you going to deal with the fact that all of these things still will cause, fluctuations in the price, which presumably will on some level be passed on to the consumers. In other words, his grocery stores aren't going to be like, who is that brand? Is it Arizona Iced Tea, who hasn't, like, they still have like 99-cent teas or something like that. Um, you know, their grocery store is not going to be that. They will just lower their prices slower and maybe less frequently than the private sector will. Okay. But they're still going to raise their prices. So, what is the plan for when all of those things that you can't legislate away? There's no policy that you can implement that gets you out of dealing with those, because they're forces that come from somewhere else. There's nothing you can do about it. So what is your plan to address them? And then if you really want to ask questions, say, okay, once you get them to acknowledge that this is primarily why prices go up, then you can ask them, okay, well, for the things that prices have went up, and then maybe retailers have increased their cost, maybe a little bit more than they should have so they could make some profit, then you can ask and say, how much have they received additional in profit above and beyond, that rise that they have to deal with? How much beyond that is unacceptable? Boxing, you're not going to get an answer. But the point being is, this is what you have to think about. All right, so I'm going to go to break real quick, kind of get my throat a little bit more moist, and then we will be right back here in just a moment. So let me get that the intermission. There we go. Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, we're back. Let's get this next item from Affordability. That's going to be fast, fare, free buses. So let's pull this up. Go over here. And there we are. All right, so I'm going to read this. Public transit should be reliable, safe, and universally accessible. But 1 in 5 New Yorkers struggle to afford the ever-rising fare. Adding insult to injury, our city's buses are the slowest in the nation, robbing working people of precious time for family, leisure, and rest. Zohran won New York's. Where'd it go? I moved it too much. All right, Zohran won New York's first fare-free bus pilot on 5 lines across the city. As mayor, he'll permanently eliminate the fare on every city bus and make them faster, but rapidly building priority lanes, expanding bus queue, jump signals, and dedicated loading zones to keep double parkers out of the way. Fast and free buses will not only make buses reliable and accessible, but will improve safety for riders and operators, creating the world class service New Yorkers deserve. All right. And he's got an article here, read at the Nation. So what's interesting is um, if you look at, and I'll pull this little graphic that he's got up on the screen for you, so you can take a look at that. Let's do that right now. Boom, there it is. All right, so I'm not going to read all the text on there, but you can watch it, and if you want to stop it and and read it, that's fine. But we've got he's got 6 different pages here. Our plan to make buses free will save 36 million hours every year. $1.5 billion in economic benefits, 2 times the cost. So he claims trips will be faster, and it's a little graphic on that, talking about how much time they'll save. 1 in 5 New Yorkers struggle to afford the fare, so they're going to talk about how they're talking about how free buses would create nearly 1.5 billion in benefits via faster, more reliable service, saved fare money. So they're basically saying the savings will pay for itself in this other way. Let's see, where's the next one there? Let's see, improve our safety and environment. So more safety, fewer crashes, reduced CO2, healthier air, less noise. It's popular. This was a fun one. So a new poll shows that 72% of voters support the city fully subsidizing public transportation so that residents can use MTA bus services for free. Yeah, like a lot of people want, if you can say, hey, the government's going to pay for it, and they're not really thinking oh yeah, I'm paying for it still, right? Will I ever use it? Do I feel good about how you spent my money, or is it just going to end up as some rundown piece of garbage that you barely maintain, and say you don't have enough money for, or whatever? All those kind of questions, so yeah, if you just phrase it would you like this? Yes. I think when you start asking people questions, I think that this positive 72% that you see probably would drop quite a bit. Or at least, they might temper it and say, well, maybe, or they would slightly disagree or something, whatever options were available per that, per this poll. So let's see what else. Last flyer here. Should be reliable, safe, and universally acceptable or accessible. Yes. That's already the goal. And that should be, even with the old system, that was an expectation. This is not some new expectation and say, okay, we're moving in society to a new direction. We're going here. This is, societies have never been here before. We're taking it this extra leap. Then sure, you could say, hey, public transit should be this and this and this and have some new criteria. But this isn't new. This is literally what it should have been the whole time. So I think it's just interesting when you start really looking at this and kind of digging in just a little bit. But I got a couple articles here. So that 3/4 of voters at 72%. Let's take a look because I'm going to read a couple things to you. So this is where it came from, and he linked it. So I know I have the right article. Or I think he linked it, but he did say by Dave Colin, and he gave the date and the title, which it all matches. So, but a DFP poll of 854 likely city voters found that 72% supported the city fully subsidizing public transportation so that residents can use MTA bus services for free. All right. And so then here's a graphic of that, and it shows all likely voters, 40% strongly support, 32% somewhat support. And then they break it down by Democrat, third party, Republicans. And then you can see that the percentage for Democrats who strongly support is 45%, and then an additional 35% for somewhat support. So basically support. You can call all that group support. Independent and third party is 38 and 28% effectively, respectively. And then Republican is 30% and 28%, again, strongly support and somewhat support respectively. So yeah, a lot of people, I don't really question necessarily that a lot of people want this. I think a lot of people are not educated on the implications here, or they think that it's going to be something more than it really is. So that leads me to this interesting. So if we go here, and this was, is this the one that I wanted? Yes. Okay. So this was a study that was done by the MTA, and it's or done by an organization, the MTA, the Transit Authority. They had they disagree with Zohran's take. So here is what that study said: that the main pilot findings of him talking about how these ideas have already been implemented and they're good. Sorry, I think I missed mentioning that. Um, Goodness, for some reason, throat is drying up tonight. The main pilot findings were ridership did increase on all routes. Okay, so that's kind of a good thing. That's what they're banking on, the idea of having the buses carry more people. Um, Limited new ridership though, because existing riders used the fare-free routes more than the new route riders. So in that particular case, it got more use. So that seems good, but the more use was actually more use from all existing riders. So you weren't getting new riders. So they're still going to be, taking whatever forms of transportation, and, they're paying that. They're not in any way contributing to this, not of any fare of any kind or anything necessarily. So you could basically say their money isn't contributing to the bus. Then you have service performance had mixed results. So like where they was, some people said it was good, some people didn't, weren't so happy with it. Fare evasion on nearby routes was consistent with system-wide rates. So you didn't really change fare evasion in these the pilot ones. You still had people trying to evade fares. And then foregone revenue, this is the big one, and related cost amounted to more than $12 million over 9 months of the pilot. So like they did this pilot for like 9 months, and they lost more than $12 million. That's not good. That's and Zoran seems to think that this was like some sort of a success, and it's unclear exactly to what success that he thinks. So for me, when I look at this and I hear, "Hey, we're going to be offering bus rides for free," well, it sounds good, but when you look at pilot programs that have been utilized elsewhere, you find out like, okay, they didn't actually do that well, and there's still some serious concerns about how this is going to generate actual money and not cost money. In the case of losing almost, around $12 million, that was a significant portion. So I oppose that, and I don't think I mentioned it a moment ago, so I apologize. I'm used to doing this in the morning and fumbling around that way, which um, you would think. I think you just get used to the vibe in the morning of trying to figure it out, and I'm used to like in the evening, I don't like it this late. I'm usually winding down and getting ready for bed so that I can get up super early. So I'm a little off my game. I apologize for that. But anyway, let's go back to that. Here it is. There we go. Sorry, I was trying to talk as I was clicking around. All right. So if we go back, we say, okay, city owned grocery stores. I'm not a fan of it. I don't think it's going to work. I think there are some unresolved problems, and I think there's some ignorance on how prices and the market works. Okay, and I think that, and I mean that politely. I just think that the ignorance is not going to get you the results that you're looking for, and that you have to understand how the market works and how it doesn't work, in order to really understand or get a grasp of, is this idea a good one? Then you have fast fare free buses. Well, so far, the pilots of those show negative things. I don't think you have to go much further than that. And all your attractive flyers and your nice videos, they you have to get around. You have to answer, why won't this fail similarly to the pilot, or maybe even worse? What about this particular program have we figured out is definitely not going to lead to that situation? right? So and I don't think they have. At least with the city-owned grocery stores, they can play the theory game, and so then it makes it a little bit harder to make an argument against it because I can't go and point and say, okay, well, look where they did it over here and it didn't work. But with the fast fare free buses, I can. I can look and say, okay, well, look, pilot studies that they reference, you know, people have evaluated them and said in these pilot studies, they've lost. They were not successful, right? Other than getting more people on them. What happens when you have more people using a thing? More wear and tear, more cost associated with it. The more people that are riding, that means you're going to have more employees for whatever reason to handle the increased load, right? So then your costs are going to go up, and if you're offering these for free, where are you getting the money for the cost that you had and the increased cost? And then, he was kind of mentioning, some things that he would like to do that seemed a little bit, like adding something. Okay, that's a great idea. I think businesses should always be trying to innovate. But if you're trying to run things without the profit motive, well, then where is the money coming from to make those kind of improvements? To say, you know what, I've got an idea. We could do this new thing or do it this new way or implement this tool or whatever, right? We can do this thing differently, provide a better service and save money, right? But we need to maybe make an investment first. Well, how can you do that if you're not working on a profit motive? You have no profit from which to draw from, right? So you're going to have to what? Pull it out of the money that you're not making. If you're breaking even, you're going to make yourself go negative so that you can improve. So you see how this is a problem? So let's get on to fighting corporate exploitation. Um, this was a little bit shorter. New York's working class is getting nickel and dimed, and Donald Trump is making it easier for his corporate pals to pick their pockets. As Trump loosens consumer protections and empowers CEOs, scammers, monopolies, and monopsy power, New York needs a mayor who will stand up to corporate greed and protect working class dollars. Zohran has a plan to do just that. He'll fight misleading advertising and predatory contracts and ban all hidden fees. He will ban non-compete clauses, which suppress wages and allow employers to take advantage of their workers. He'll end secret corporate handouts where tax dollars are given away to companies in agreements protected by NDAs, and he'll fund challenges to utility companies so that Con Ed can't raise prices without a fight. All right. He's got his policy memo. I will put that up on the screen. Let me see here. And we'll just kind of skim through it. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's like 5 pages, which it's not a lot to read. I just feel like it's a lot to read on a podcast. And I'll just kind of point out some issues that I have with this. And then I think we'll leave it at that. So let me get that up on the screen. There you go. All right. So he says fighting corporate exploitation. And he says New York's working class is getting nickeled and dimed, and Donald Trump is making it easier for his corporate pals to pick their pockets. He fired federal trade commissioners who were working to hold corporations accountable. He's dismantling the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which prevents companies from engaging in scams that have cost Americans billions of dollars. And the chaos he's created is incentivizing trade fraud. Okay. None of what he mentioned is really within the purview of a city. Yes, you could say Donald Trump fired federal, FTC, federal trade commissioners. Okay, fine. He did that. He's within his power to do that. Like that can happen. And so it doesn't make sense to me for a mayor to necessarily, it's almost like he's running against the president here, and saying like, oh, well, look, the president's doing these things. We got to do things differently here because we don't like what he's doing. And so it's like, okay, if the laws aren't being enforced, then go through the legal channels and get them enforced. Or you could make additional laws that govern New York, plain and simple. And then you can but here's the thing. Where did it go here? Thought I saw it here. Okay, so what he's the way he's written it And we don't want to overanalyze it. But the way that he's written it here, it kind of suggests that these are going to be outcomes that will, the outcomes eventually will trickle down. I hate to use that term, but trickle down to you. So Trump did this thing, and then this is going to happen. Eventually, this is how it's going to affect you in the long run. But that hasn't happened yet. There's still several years. I think it's very speculative. So I think we have to be careful about, he's talking about, what he's going to do as an elected mayor to deal with the problem that has not yet come. That's not necessarily clear that will come. Okay. Because I'm not saying that Donald Trump is acting, 100% without any, deference to anybody or without trying to help anybody that's at his level. I think they all do that. So, like, okay, the last president did that and the president before him did that and so on and so forth. Like, that doesn't necessarily make it okay, but this is not some, thing that's suddenly happening. Okay. So, yes, he may be getting rid of these, these folks. He may be dismantling certain things, but they aren't dismantled yet. So then he goes on and he says, the timing couldn't be worse. Groceries are already too expensive. Tariffs are sending prices even higher, and rent is soaring. So again, I mentioned a moment ago before the break. What was it? What was that term? I'm trying to look back at my notes here. Um, the the oh yeah, there's regulatory and policy pressures. So that's one of those things that increases the cost. And so he's pointing out, he's like, look, we've got tariffs, right? So there are things that are out of control that he cannot. I'm kind of going back a little bit here, back to the grocery stores. When we're talking about like, hey, these grocery stores are not going to operate for profit. And I said, they're still going to be dealing with market forces. And I said, tariffs was one of them. And then here he is pointing out, he's like, groceries are already too expensive. Tariffs are sending prices even higher. Okay. And rent is soaring. So he's basically saying, he's acknowledging that, yes, there are things that happen external to New York that we cannot escape and get around. So this is why I think you cannot be, a not-for-profit grocery store to try to help people, in this particular way. Because I think you're just going to end up dealing with all these forces and then having to try to compensate in an incorrect way. I just think you're making a mess of it. So anyway, sorry, I'm getting a little bit sidetracked there. So we're talking about this one. So he wants to fight unfair, deceptive, or abusive practices. Okay, you know what? I support that. I do. I don't think there's nothing wrong with that. And then he goes on, he says, like misleading advertising or predatory contracts. So it depends on what we mean by misleading. Right. I'm not going to try to be like, what is the definition of is? I'm not getting into that point. I'm just saying, like, we have to make sure that him and I, when I've talked to people that are on the left or even people that are different spot on the right than me, I will find that sometimes we use the same word to mean drastically different things. So I think here it's going to be, if we're going to agree on what it means to be misleading advertising or what constitutes a predatory contract, then once we know what those definitions mean and don't mean, then we can either agree or disagree. But I would agree on the idea that if an advertiser is falsely telling you something or leading you to believe something that's incorrect, like, let me think. I'm trying to think of an example. And they do it. There are ways that are very subtle, and then there are ways that I think are very, very outright. So let me think. Because I want to think of the more outright one. So if like, okay, so I'm selling you a car, and then I say, man, nothing is broken on this. Okay. You will reasonably think of that as nothing is broken. But if you later find out that there is, maybe the fuel line, uh, not the tank, not the tank, but the tube that goes to the tank, maybe that's kind of damaged a little bit. And when he said there's no, there's nothing wrong with it, there's no damage to it, he might have been trying to communicate that and be clever and say, well, what I was trying to say, what I meant was there was no significant damage. That would be misleading. right? That's not advertising per se, but that would be an example of what it means to be misleading. And then predatory contracts, if the contract lists everything, it's not predatory. Now, if it obscures something so that you can't understand it, that's a different story. We can have a conversation. But I'm pretty sure that him and I are not going to agree on what it means to be a predatory contract. And ban all hidden fees. I agree. Like the ones that tack on $10 or $20 to the advertising price during checkout. Um, it depends on, like, okay, we can have this argument about at what point does it become a hidden fee, right? I would argue that right as you're paying for it, you should be able to see an itemized list of what you're paying for and what it cost right there. So even if you don't see the fees until that moment and you don't know about them, that's the moment you have to review your bill. So therefore, it would not be a hidden fee. Now he would probably call it a hidden fee based on what he's saying here, like the ones that tack on $10 or $20 to the advertised price during checkout. Okay, well then it sounds like, is there an opportunity for somebody to review the final bill before they say yes and swipe their card? If there isn't, then I would agree that's a hidden fee, right? But if it's just, hey, it was put up at the last moment and you neglected to read it, it's not hidden. It's there. And if everybody knows and can tell you it's there, like it's not like one of those things where they're like, well, we had it there, but we just didn't tell them where it was. It was hidden way down deep and we didn't tell them, but it was there. Well, then, yeah, that would be deceptive. But this would be something that everybody would be like, hey, check your bill. I can't believe that I got a $10 fee for this or a dollar, fee added for this. Right. And people, word of mouth will get around. So it wouldn't be hidden. Then he says, ban non-compete clauses, which suppress wages and allow employers to take advantage of all of their workers. Again, this is like earlier when I had said, at the very beginning where I was talking about, where did I go here? I was talking about prices, and let me see here. Where did I go? What it is that I was, where did it, what was that I said exactly? Um, I'm drawing a blank on it, but I know earlier I had mentioned how there is, he presents only one side of it, not the other side. Well, that's the case here. When we're talking about non-compete clauses, he says suppress wages and allow employers to take advantage of their workers. Okay. Well, what it also allows for people to do is to work out between themselves the kind of company that they want to work for. So I could work, if I go to a company and they say we have a non-compete clause, and I say, okay, what is the non-compete clause? They might say, well, here's what the clause is, and then I can agree or disagree, right? So it's like there's that feedback loop for them. But then also it might be an incentive for me to work there because if there's a non-compete clause, then the company might be also offering more investment in their workers, more training, more education, which that's going to stay with them. Even if you say, okay, well, you've got a non-compete clause, you can't compete with another employer for 5 years after quitting with us, right? So that clause might be in there. But the value add might be somebody might say, well, for the kind of place that this place is, and I would like to work for them, I would be willing to sign that non-complete compete clause in order to get the value of working for this particular company. In other words, this negotiation, it starts before they even get in the door because it's like, okay, what do you have? What do I want? And both sides are doing it. And so if there's a lot of prestige, somebody may want some of that prestige, and somebody that has that prestige may want to protect maybe some of their secrets or whatever, trade secrets, those kind of things. And so they may offer non-compete clauses so that they get protection internally. But then they're also, and so it becomes kind of a negotiation. If nobody's coming to them to go and work, then guess what they have to do? They have to say, okay, well, maybe our non-compete clause is too strict. We need to lighten up a little bit. And so then they lighten up a little bit. Then people come and work. And so both parties are getting something beneficial out of this. So it's just not the case that employers necessarily take advantage of their workers. Where it gets taken advantage of is when government allows companies to be free from competition. So if there was something that was helping elevate these particular companies to a little bit higher status that some other company wasn't getting because maybe there's a law that affects one company more than the other, what have you. Well, those kind of things cause an imbalance that the market has trouble working with and resolving. So for me, and maybe I'm kind of rambling a wee bit here on the non-compete clauses, but I think what's missing is how is this a negotiation or how is it a value add to the employees that are working for them, right? Because like I could work for a company and I might want something in the non-compete clause from other workers that are with me. I might find that a valuable thing. Like, hey, we all have a non-compete. If I stay with this company for long term, which I'm hoping to do, then these other guys, when they leave, you know, there will be some level of advantage for us in the marketplace, right? So again, there are benefits for the employees. He's just leaving them out. And secret corporate handouts by banning non-disclosure agreements for New York City's Economic Development Corporation. New Yorkers should know how much money their government is giving to companies. Yes. So I agree with this one. Totally. There should not be any corporate handouts, but definitely not any secret ones. So they should ban that. Totally support it. There's because that's all that is the city picking winners and losers in the marketplace. Then the last one is fund challenges to utility companies so that Con Ed and National Grid cannot force consumers' hands. We have to dig into that to see. I don't know what that exactly means. And so without knowing a little bit more, because I'm not familiar with Con Ed or National Grid, I can't really comment on those. But judging by the rest of everything that I've read from him so far and critiqued, I'm going to suppose that I either won't like this in its entirety or that there'll be just a small portion of it that I don't like. And I don't like maybe the rest. Like there's some elements that I just like, to me, that would be too far. So I don't know, but I didn't get into it. And I figured, I'm trying not to be, too text heavy on the screen. That's what I'm trying to do. So, all right, folks. Well, that's my show for tonight.